showtime, a-holes.
Hey there, Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I am super excited because this weekend is a huge weekend for us, maybe like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us. You and I, we're going to be sitting in the stadium for the big game tomorrow.
At the SoFi Stadium.
Yeah, we're going to be, we're recording this on Saturday, and tomorrow is Super Bowl Sunday.
Why don't we just record this at the Super Bowl?
we
Let's just talk about Marvel in our two seats as we watch, who is it? Rams versus Bengals?
Yeah.
Clearly, I'm not your typical Super Bowl attendee.
Yeah, if you're willing to just sit there and but we're gonna see all the festivities.
No,
all the
I'm
cool stuff.
absolutely excited to be in the stadium. Of course, it's safe. There's a number of protocols.
Yeah.
There's security.
Yeah.
And there's COVID safety. So it seems like the right time.
Right.
But nonetheless, I mean, that halftime show.
Yeah, that's what I hear. Everyone I talk to about it, they're all saying that that's the one thing that they're looking forward to. I'm trying to remember all the names. It's Dr. Dre, it's Mary J. Blige, it's Eminem, it's Snoop Dogg, and Kendrick. Who's Kendrick?
Kendrick Lamar.
Kendrick Lamar.
It's interesting trying to see you remember the names of artists that you barely know about.
I think I know one song from any of these people,
don't.
and it's because it won an Academy Award.
I guarantee you probably know more than one song.
Okay, maybe. I mean, look, listeners, I grew up listening to Fleetwood Mac. I don't know anything about contemporary or even semi-contemporary hip hop music. So I'm a 70s and 80s kid. Now, if Run DMC was going to be there, I could do like all their songs.
You know it.
But yeah, I'm excited because everyone's saying. In fact, I heard someone on the radio who got to watch the rehearsal of the halftime performance, and they said that it's ranked up within their like top 2 or 3 of all time. So I'm excited just to have that opportunity, and I'm sure we'll be tweeting and Instagramming from the big game and in the days that follow as we come down off the high. But this week is also kind of a big deal for us, Drea, because, listeners, we don't normally have ads. We don't normally have sponsors. That's been a conscious decision, I would say. And that all changed this week when we were contacted by someone, and the email was intriguing because you normally don't want to have ads, but the moment they said that this was a DC related product, you had to have some.
Well, I typically don't want to I don't want us to get distracted from the important conversations that we have on the show.
Right.
I think this is a good reason to get distracted.
Yeah.
It's a good distraction. It's a healthy distraction.
So, Dre, let me ask you, what is something that you look forward to waking up every morning?
I would have to say a little time with the cats, a strong cup of coffee, a little stretching.
Maybe the face of someone you love.
Yeah, that's also good.
Well, MeUndies wants to add to that list. Start your mornings with your favorite underwear, not just any underwear, but ridiculously soft undies with ridiculous prints that make picking out underwear actually fun. And they allowed us to pick out some underwear on their site. I am wearing mine right now. It's not just underwear. I'm wearing some boxer briefs that have a really fun design on them. It's like a bunch of beavers like lounging around in the water. And I am wearing a pair of their socks. They're like ankle length socks. And I'm wearing my favorite thing that I got. And
I wanted to steal these pants. To describe these pants.
they're like loungy pants. They're the kind of pants you might wear. You might think of like a sort of athletic, you'd kind of work out in them. Or you just lounge around in them. They're so soft. I'm not going to lie. This is the second day I'm wearing them. This is a good pair of pants. I like this pair of pants.
They're so soft. I'm jealous. I'm waiting for mine to arrive. And know I will be talking about it on the next show. Not only is MeUndies so fun to say, but MeUndies makes the softest fabrics you've ever put on your body. You can sit on your couch all day or go out and live the comfiest life. I think nowadays this is how we live our lives, right? Comfort. And once you try their undies, socks, bralettes, and loungewear, you'll never want to go back. You can choose from a range of limited edition prints and colors and sizes from extra small to 4XL. You can also sign up for their free to join MeUndies membership. MeUndies membership. Love that.
And it's free. That's when people said there was a membership, I was like, okay, there's going to be a cost associated with this. It is free.
No, you get a monthly subscription that sends new styles right to your door. Plus, you can enjoy discounted pricing, free shipping, and exclusive early access to new launches. And I hear there will be some bats coming our way.
Some bats. That's right. There's going to be some DC related merch that they're going to have. So that's why we were super excited and we can't wait to get them. MeUndies has a great offer for our listeners. For any first-time purchasers, you get 15% off and free shipping. MeUndies also has their promise. If you're not satisfied with any product for any reason, you can return your order for a full refund within 45 days.
To get your 15% off your first order and free shipping, just go to MeUndies.com/Arkham. That's MeUndies.com/Arkham, ARKHAM.
I'm excited about talking about this show. I feel like we've sort of have been going down this path already with other episodes like, say, Black Widow. But I feel like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is really all about family and blood relations versus the family you choose to have, and which one is more important, or which one is maybe more toxic in some lives. And that's really what I'm getting from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is it's all about family.
It is my favorite movie. Do I say this about other movies?
Yeah, you say it pretty much about every movie that we watch. But
look, Guardians, the first Guardians is great.
Yeah.
This Guardians movie is so good because they're willing to be vulnerable. Like the writing itself is willing to be vulnerable. It can be very touching. It can be heartbreaking. It can be heartwarming. Because the film is actually so beautiful, and just in terms of the visual effects and the scope. This takes place in space. There's multiple planets. There's huge landscapes. There's space travel. There's spacecraft. It's the kind of movie. Tons of stuff.
You were talking in Doctor Strange about just how little of the movie must have been shot practically, and in this movie, I would imagine even less of it is shot practically.
But in a way, it's not overwhelming.
Yeah.
In a way, it's so purposeful, and it takes pauses. I wish Doctor Strange would do this. Doctor Strange was so invasive with it. This film has these moments. I can remember one where I believe it's the planet Ego, which we'll soon learn is itself toxic. But Gamora is at one point standing in a field or in this huge open area.
Yeah, it's like a field. There's
it's
a bit of a prairie.
There's just her and you kind of get this wide shot, and there's multiple shots like this of other characters at times. You just kind of see their surroundings, and it takes moments like that and doesn't rush you through the feeling. And then it builds those emotions. It builds the emotions that I think we're supposed to be open to. The loneliness of it, the fear of it, the vulnerability of it, the desperation of it, whatever it is that they're trying to capture. Emotionally, this movie is so present and offers so much. And they do so because these characters are so well written and so full of depth.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine other movies. I think that other movies have tried to do this, and especially in the Marvel, MCU franchise. But I think they've really given us these relationships, built these relationships over the first movie and over some time, and then allowed us to be open to some pretty dark stuff.
Yeah.
Thanos is not in this film, but is talked about.
His fingerprints are all over this movie.
He's an abusive parent, and they don't mince words with that. They don't make it symbolic. They make it very, very direct and explicit about how his parenting has caused this rift between the girls, between the daughters.
And it's the same thing that we saw with, was it one of the Avengers movies when Black Widow comes out and says, this is how the Red Room changed her. These are the horrific things that happened to me. And this movie doubles down on that, where this is what Thanos did to Nebula specifically. And it really is as horrific, if not even more so.
And it's in the family.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why this movie is such a boundary pusher, like does kind of take us to a place. It carries us through a lot of emotions, but it does so intentionally.
Yeah.
I think because it wants to make us feel these things.
Yeah.
It wants us to relate to these characters and these relationships. And certainly it's willing to show us some dark aspects of, it's so funny because these are aliens, these are raccoons, maybe not raboons. These are characters and creatures who are not like us, but this group of Marvel heroes, I'd say, are the most relatable.
Yeah.
They really do live their lives the way we do, and they really do get their hearts broken like we do, and then they repair like we do. So it's such a great film. I barely have any criticism about this film.
Which is interesting because when this film came out, it was sort of reviled across the internet. People really didn't like it. And I think it's for a lot of the uncomfortable reasons that you just mentioned is it makes you feel things, and we get to watch as we hear about the torture done to Nebula, this sort of punitive actions for failing to beat her sister at a young age in various training scenarios, and then it also becomes about, I think it sort of came out at the wrong time, where it was really about a powerful white man wanting to join forces with his powerful young white son, and
you're talking about Kurt Russell, who plays Ego, and
Ego,
Chris Pratt, who plays Star-Lord.
Yeah, so a lot of people were unhappy that they were watching that, but I think when you remove yourself from the movie a couple of years and you go back to it just like Black Widow watching after Civil War, I think this movie is a really powerful story. It's sort of the anti Field of Dreams, right? It's this character who's done nothing but look for his father most of his life. Whether it was active or not is not really, I think, important. But it's this idea of never knowing who your father was, who your parent was, and constantly wondering if that parent ever wanted you to begin with. I mean, this is the classic foster child, adoptive kid's story, right?
For some,
right.
It's the search for belongingness. But let me just mention something, because you said that at the time people may not have been accepting of the plot. I understood it as the son being willing to interrupt a legacy of privilege and harm.
Yes.
That he was offered to be a part of that legacy.
100%. Yes.
And he dismantled that. He rejected the, prolonging and being a participant in that.
But people were unhappy at the time with it being, because I even went back and I looked at some of the reviews, and this isn't so much the critics, this is more fan sort of reviews. Is people they didn't love the, powerful white dudes, and now the 30-something-year-old white dudes got celestial powers, and it's all about privilege. It's all about this.
Sure, but again, on face value,
exactly. And when you break it down, you're absolutely right. He is rejecting that cycle.
And as we'll talk about, it ain't even about him,
right?
It becomes about the other characters who are very dynamic and actually much more interesting, and much more, in many ways, powerful than he is. And I use that word very broadly. So we should probably get into the plot a little bit, but I do agree with you. This film is all about a sense of belonging. And I completely align with you around the complexity of that, right? Yeah. Belonging to whom and among whom, right? We're really here talking about unconditional love, tolerance, and acceptance, which doesn't necessarily come from family, but is often originated, or at least demanded from family, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that doesn't work out. And where do we find that unconditional love?
Yeah.
And it doesn't always end in a bow. This movie has a mixed ending. There are some successes, but there are also some tragedies.
Yeah. I want to start with a character that we talked a little bit of before about, and that's Drax. There was an importance to Drax in the original Guardians of the Galaxy. A lot of people felt like he represented people on the spectrum, this inability to recognize the moment, the emotion of the moment, or to read the room. There were a lot of people who felt like he represented
a community.
Yeah. And to some degree, I agree, and I love this particular portrayal of Drax. But in this movie, I wonder if you can maybe talk a little bit about this, because you're certainly more qualified than I. He's almost the one who's the most emotional of all. And the reason I ask, or the reason I say that, is there's a moment where a character named Mantis, she's an empath. She has the ability.
Oh, we've got to talk about Mantis.
If Mantis touches you, she can feel what you're feeling. And it doesn't appear to be amplified. It simply appears to be the intensity of the emotion you are feeling in that moment. And every single time she touches Drax, he is pure that emotion. Like, that is all he's feeling. There's no complexity whatsoever. It's a very simple, she touches him at one point when he's laughing at Quill, and it's played as a joke, as if to suggest, wow, this really is, funny. But she touches him and says, "I've never felt such joy." And it's like, oh, in this moment, he is purely that emotion. And later, when he is sad, she touches him and instantly begins crying. I mean, she feels such sadness, such loss. This is not a character who does not understand emotion. This is a character who almost does nothing but feel emotion in any given moment.
And there's a freedom. There's like you said, I appreciated how you said it was very pure. Mm-hmm. It's uninhibited. It seems very sort of unfiltered.
Yeah.
There's something really wholesome to that. And I want to say that a lot of times there's a misunderstanding about the autism spectrum. And I want to highlight the spectrum part. The spectrum reminds us that there's a variety of different presentations in a very large spectrum. And so you're not going to be able to characterize one profile or one type of person and say that's what autism is like, because there's a variety of different ways that people experience and present with autism. The other thing too that people misunderstand is they think that persons with autism are unfeeling. They believe that they don't relate emotionally, don't express emotions, and don't understand emotions. Yeah, and it's a little bit of it's a little bit of a myth that I think people kind of cling on to. Yeah, and they assume that people along the spectrum can't relate emotionally. Right, they do experience they experience tremendous levels of emotion. Yeah, this is what I wanted you to... I mean, I think that's why Drax might still kind of be a good representation. Again, certainly not for everybody, but to show us that even though there seems to be a disconnection sometimes, even though he seems to miss cues and he doesn't catch the subtleties of social interactions. He doesn't catch the what we would call micro expressions, right? The kinds of ways in which you and I might relate to one another, or sometimes the kind of ways you try to relate to me and I miss it. Quite frankly, it's those micro expressions that help people understand subtlety. Yeah, and then they filter themselves. People with autism experience very strong emotions of all types, and it may be that they don't express their emotions the way that other people do, or that they don't interpret and read and pick up emotions the way that other people do. Yeah. So when we see Drax sort of expressing his emotions, feeling his emotions, and I'd even say sort of like regulating his emotions very differently, it can be very freeing. It can actually be something that we admire about him, because he doesn't care what other people think. Yeah. He just feels it and he expresses it, and he doesn't realize that sometimes he might hurt someone's feelings. Right. You know. And then I should also say that there's an intersection of social anxiety and autism, where someone may feel a tremendous amount of nervousness, of the kind of emotion that's social anxiety. And when somebody has those feelings, then they might actually be more closed off. They may not be like Drax. Right. So again, let's step away from trying to think of someone as being defined by their autism or by their social anxiety or by whatever one characterization we have of them. And I think Drax is a really, really whole, fulfilling example of someone who isn't just one thing. Yeah. You talked about an excitement to speak about Mantis. Well, Mantis is a character from the comics. And I know that some people had mixed feelings about her representation in this film. Why? I think that, from what I recall, not liking that she's described as a pet. Oh. By Drax. Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, it's again, I think people aren't paying attention. Right. She is described as a pet, but ugly by Drax. Yeah. Yeah. And she is, in a way, here's the part that I think should be recalled. She's in service to ego. Yes. So she is I actually don't know what species or intergalactic race she is. She's not human. Right. She's sort of a humanoid type person with 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and a couple of antennae. That's what humanoid means. Yeah, right? Yeah. Right, and she has these antennae. Yeah. And she is an empath, which seems to be a fundamental characteristic of her species, of her people. And she functions to ego as almost almost like a...
She's melatonin. She is a drug that is used to regulate his anxiety, his she is basically whatever drug he needs.
She regulates him, and she says when he needs to sleep, I help him sleep.
Yeah.
And there are other ways. It seems as though she's in service to his well-being.
And again, she's an orphan. She describes that she was orphaned on her planet. He found her and took her. And so, there's this...
You have a dynamic, and this dynamic is totally central to this film. Again, how do you have unconditional belongingness to one another, and where does it leak into ownership? Mm-hmm. Where does it leak into a conditional bind? And there are some characters who completely refuse to be in that, which we'll talk about. And she is a character who perceives the relationship as, I wouldn't say equal, but kind of a
symbiotic.
Yeah, that they both. Well,
I think she's terrified of him.
Yeah, I mean,
I question what life is like on planet Ego when
no one's there,
when Quill and family aren't there. Like I can't imagine. I mean, I imagine that he is probably. We should talk a little bit about Ego in talking about this. He is clearly a godlike character who sees everyone else in the universe as insects or less than insects because he is eternal and they are, incredibly finite, so he just does not relate to other living beings. So for him, he views her as, and she even describes herself basically as a tick. She is a parasite. She is someone who is on the back of this dog, Ego, but she has a purpose. So her purpose is, and this is basically why Ego allows her to exist. Her purpose is to regulate his emotions. And she talks about how he is constantly, really endlessly searching for his son and searching for someone to share his existence with. And again, it's emotion that is so plentiful that it prevents him from even getting a good night's sleep, a rest. And she uses her power to regulate those emotions. And when needed, she can put him to sleep. And take away that anxiety, that discomfort. But as we know, she shares it because, basically what she's doing is for that period of time, she is now embodying or allowing herself to be the embodiment of that anxiety, of that emotion.
She feels it. She experiences it.
I imagine it's probably a very abusive relationship.
We should probably talk about the planet itself and fundamentally how horrible this god is.
Right.
Because it really sets the context for, I think, this relationship especially. But it also needs to be said that he is the villain. He at first seems to be the savior. He seems to be somebody who Quill is fascinated with. He's literally never met him, right?
He is every bit the man that Quill's mother fell in love with.
Right. And there's this idea that that Ego explains much later, actually, that he takes the form of somebody that he believes Quill would look up to, would admire.
Yeah.
And it's Kurt Russell. At one point it is David Hasselhoff. There's kind of that joke there, but it's like...
We should say why. The joke, Quill believed that, or didn't believe, but Quill chose the fantasy that David Hasselhoff from Knight Rider was his father. And so...
And so explain who this person actually really is. What is
David Hasselhoff from Knight Rider?
Not David.
Michael Knight?
Who's David Hasselhoff? No, the character of Ego, like who he really is and what he's really doing, what kind of destruction he's really perpetuating.
Yeah. So ultimately, he describes himself as a celestial, which is interesting because this is the very first time we've ever heard this term used, but it won't be the last. And Dre, I'll ask you in a minute if you remember having heard the term celestial before. He is a celestial, he says, and his whole thing is he just sort of existed. Almost as if the Big Bang, he just kind of was. And he went searching for others like him. He went searching for life throughout the universe and eventually found it and began to sort of spread his seed throughout the universe in hopes of ultimately creating someone else like him so that he could share his life and in existence with someone else who would also be forever, who would be immortal. At one point, he even says something to the effect of, "Finally, I'm not alone." And when he realizes that Peter does in fact have the ability to use this celestial like power. And he has used this power over the course of existence to create a planet layer by layer. And he describes it as being just a little bit larger than the size of our moon. And it has his face on it. He is, because the planet is Ego. Like the man
it's
we see.
It's like an extension of him.
Yeah, the man we see is just an extension of the power. It's just, this is just kind of, I've manifested. But Ego is the planet, right? The core of the planet is a brain. It's Ego's brain. And ultimately, we know that this is nefarious because he eventually tells us when he believes that Peter can be easily swayed to his side, he's open about the fact that when he found life, eventually he was disappointed in it and he didn't like it. And he realized just how finite it was. And he ultimately wants something else for the universe. And so he wants Peter to join with him so that he can harness the power of the light that's within the planet. And with that, he will be able to destroy an infinite number of worlds. I mean, wherever he's spread his
and Ego has destroyed
individuals
and groups and seems to want to. I mean, somewhat like Star Wars, he wants to enlist his son to join him.
Together, we can rule
the galaxy
as father and son. Yeah. And Peter ain't into it because Peter ultimately is more human than he is celestial, quote unquote. And he's much more of a mama's boy. He was raised by his mother. His mother was everything to him. So instead, he sees a father that abandoned his family. He sees a father that rejected the life of humanity and of being, a quill. And we learn that that Ego is the reason that Peter's mother died of cancer. Peter believes that his mother simply contracted a tumor. So he developed a tumor naturally and it was inoperable and she died of cancer. But we learn through a heinous story that Ego genuinely did love her. He came back to see her 3 times after he had left. And he says that I knew if I came back a 4th, I would never have left. And that would have been a huge problem because the longer he is away from his planet self, he loses the light. He becomes mortal and, so basically it's this idea of I can give up my immortality or maybe even cease to exist since he's just a manifestation of planet. Now we're going back to like what was the Clayface episode where the little girl. The little girl.
Oh, I know.
So now you're kind of looking at that scenario where like maybe he ceases to be Ego at that point, or maybe just ceases to exist at all because Ego can't control him beyond a certain distance for too long. And he ultimately says he's the one who placed the tumor in her because he knew that if he just went ahead and killed her, he wouldn't have to come back. And that instantly sets Peter off. And Peter turns against his father.
Yeah, I will. And there is the domestic violence. There is one of many overt mentions of family violence and trauma within a family. And I think too, I mean, I like what you said about Peter. I think too, he recognizes that what he values are the imperfect connections that he has with the people that he cares about.
Yeah.
In other words, wow, you might be my dad, but
you're not my father.
Yeah. Well, what does that mean? I mean, that comes up a couple times in the film. It means you created me just like you created this planet, just like you created other manifestations of things that are fundamentally a part of your godlike powers.
Yeah.
But it's a rejection of that. I don't want to be a part of that kind of family.
Yeah.
I've discovered that family to me isn't this blood relationship. Family to me is being bonded to somebody emotionally. Family to me is rescuing others, being there for others, having others depend on me. And again, it's that contingency. The dad wanted him to be close to him with this huge contingency. You're going to make me more powerful.
Yeah.
That's why you matter.
Yeah.
And I think one of the...
But that's also sort of the dream that's sort of a comic book plot way of also embodying this dream of immortality that people seem to have, especially men, with keeping the bloodline going.
Yeah.
Like, as long as I have a son, as long as I have an heir, I will be forever. And it's sort of a manifestation of that as well, where it's this, you are only important to me because it means my legacy continues.
Well, and we see versions of this play out.
Yeah.
With Yondu taking in Quill. And
taking in, that's interesting. So we should talk a little bit about Yondu, and I'm glad that you bring him up. Yondu, which might be one of the better characters in the entire movie, is revealed ultimately to have been a child trafficker, right? Even the other Ravagers in the other factions of Ravagers in the universe have rejected him and his team because they don't believe in child trafficking. And we learned that Ego actually hired Yondu to find his son and to bring him back to him. And instead, Yondu found the kid, and he says decided to keep Quill because Quill was small and could get into places that the other thieves couldn't, and it made it very useful. But what we learn is, while that might have been true, he also ultimately knew who Ego was. He knew what this meant, and he knew this was a bad idea to put these two together. So he withheld Quill.
Yeah, and I think too, a part of that relationship had that contingency too.
Yeah.
That Quill ultimately believed as he got older that Yondu only cared for him, only kept him around, only wanted to be close because of the contingency. He is helping him with his legacy, with his power grab, with his control. And so we see these different versions. We've got to talk about Thanos. But also, we see these different versions of these dyads where it's father-son dynamic that isn't unconditional.
But what I want to make sure that we do is, because we learn toward the end of the movie that of those three examples, Yondu was the one who was actually probably doing the right thing. Like there was a belief that the only reason he was keeping Quill was for this, and Quill believed that he was basically being used as a tool. What Quill didn't know until much later, spoiler alert, the end of Yondu's life, is that there was deep love there, and that he was the better version of a father, right? He did raise the kid to be a thief, to be a rogue, but he was also doing everything he could to protect Peter and to make sure that Peter never, encountered his real father. And so while I would say, yes, you're absolutely right, that there is that in that relationship to some degree, it's not as pure as Thanos's and Ego's, where like that genuinely was their motivation for these.
No, I totally agree with you. The dynamic between Yondu and Star-Lord becomes a definition in this film for a caring father-like figure.
Yeah.
And he does it with Rocket too. Strangely, Yondu and Rocket become bonded as well.
Yeah.
And it's, I would like to talk about that, because that scene is, again, where this film decides to show some vulnerability among the characters and also say some stuff that can be a punch to the gut, say some stuff that really resonates with us, that pushes the story forward, but also kind of gives us these just visceral emotional moments that they don't have to do. I mean, this is a Marvel movie. They don't necessarily have to get that deep.
And not only is it a Marvel movie, it's a James Gunn movie. And James Gunn has notoriously spent a career making movies that were fun and gross. But
gross.
Well, he comes from the trauma camp. So very campy, cheap horror. And you saw Slither.
No, I did not.
You not, at least not most of it. Your eyes were covered. But this is a guy who's known for sort of sophomoric humor, and yet we have seen that it takes that kind of storyteller to tell a story like this. Like this movie has got James Gunn all over it. And I think that it really took someone like James Gunn to be able to put this story together.
Well, and it comes in interesting forms. Yondu is a
Ravager.
Yondu is a Ravager, is outwardly very kind of scary looking. He has these like sharp, menacing teeth. His language is very biting. He's a part of the Ravagers. They are ruthless.
They are called Ravagers.
He's
got Michael Rooker's voice, which in itself can be menacing if you don't know that Michael Rooker is just a really nice guy.
His weapon is this arrow that he mentally, or that we think he mentally operates, and he's quite skilled in it. He's a killer, and look, Rocket. I can talk for a long time about Rocket. Rocket, as we know, is a creature who is very unique. He was experimented on another planet. He has the brilliance of a pilot, a tactician, a mechanic.
He was engineered to be this. Yeah,
he was genetically engineered to look like a raccoon, but be a brilliant person. And emotionally, these two characters seem at first glance like there's not much there. Like what could they share emotionally? What matters to them? And there, I think, are moments where Rocket demonstrates his grit. It's very clear, and everyone points out that he was traumatized. Like no one cared about you. No one, you were created. You were weaponized. I think he's valued. I think people value him for his skills, but he sees himself as a loner, and he can't really trust anyone aside from Groot.
Right.
So he has this sense, I mean, he's a rogue.
And he forces everyone to not trust him. Like he puts that on, like if he sees something shiny, he will take it. If he thinks something's, because we realize that the whole reason they're in the trouble that they are in the beginning of the film is they're protecting these batteries for this group of other genetically gifted. I mean, that's what I think is brilliant about the beginning of the movie, and the setup is that these characters that are all gold even describe themselves as we were genetically created to be perfect in every way. Each one of us has a purpose. We have been genetically created for that purpose. We are the perfect society, right? Anything that is not perfect is destroyed. And Rocket is the thing that is not perfect, right? He is the character that is the antithesis of this golden group of people. And so what does he do? He instinctively just steals the batteries. The things that they're supposed to be protecting, because they were so easy to take, he just takes them. And it's more like it's just for giggles for him. Like, it's not even necessarily about money. It's about, like, look what I did to you. And so that's sort of Rocket's personality, is to keep pushing everyone away, even if it makes foes of everybody. And in fact, there's a moment when, because he and Peter are sort of bitterly yapping at one another, and Peter turns to him and says, "Are you trying to make everyone hate you? Because it's working."
Yeah, and he is.
Yeah.
He is. I do like that exchange because, again, they say what most of us are kind of feeling, and they just say it, and they just go there.
Yeah.
And Rocket, I said Rocket's a rogue. He travels down his own path. The reason I like him is that he refuses to be oppressed. He refuses to be taken into what we've been talking about, a relationship of contingencies. Now, he's willing to be tit for tat. He's willing to work with people if he gets something out of it. So I'm not saying he's like completely, unable to be in a relationship where there's negotiations. But he refuses. It's this amazing resilience and a refusal to be owned, to be oppressed, to be where he was in his origin, which is totally dehumanized. And he's in the form of a raccoon, which is a constant reminder that he's dehumanized, and he has to fight against that at every step. And I wonder if you can play the interaction between Yondu and Rocket. They're essentially on a ship heading to the rest of the party, and Yondu is willing to call him out because Rocket has just continued to say, I'm in this for my own gain. None of these people are my friends. Like he starts to crack a little bit. And I wonder if you can play that.
Yeah, got it right here. Here we go.
You can fool yourself and everyone else, but you can't fool me. I know who you are.
You don't know anything about me, loser.
I know everything about you. I know you play like you're the meanest and the hardest, but actually you're the most scared of all.
Shut up!
I know you steal batteries you don't need, and you push away anyone who's willing to put up with you, because just a little bit of love reminds you how big and empty that hole inside you actually is.
I said shut up!
I know them scientists what made you never gave a rat's ass about you.
I'm serious, dude!
Just like my own damn parents who sold me, their own little baby, into slavery. I know who you are, boy. Because you're me.
What kind of a pair are we?
And again, it's like, these are the two least likely characters we would feel emotional about. Like, they're not the most likable at first. They've done some bad things. They're imperfect. And we learn that each of them, like these two in particular, have a lot in common despite being completely different. Being essentially taught, if not socialized, that they don't matter. And here I think Yondu is showing some development. Like, he sees Rocket maybe getting close to this concept of like self-actualization around relationships. Like maybe you do matter and maybe you actually do care.
Yeah.
And let's just say it.
Yeah.
Like, why don't we just make that true?
Yeah.
And it's my favorite scene. I've actually played this scene in some of my lectures. Like,
You have?
Yes, I've showed this scene a number of times in some presentations because I want to demonstrate how a comic book movie can teach us a little bit about some fundamental psychological things that we can relate to. So I really like the way it's written.
And we should say that by the end of the movie, Yondu has not only redeemed himself, but has made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure that his kid, Peter, survives. Right?
Mm-hmm.
He gives Peter the protective space sort of force field suit when he only had one, and ensures that the child he has raised, since he was a little boy, goes on. And as a result, there are realizations throughout the galaxy, because who tells the other Ravagers? It's Rocket. Rocket makes sure that the other Ravagers in the universe know that Yondu was really a good character, made the ultimate sacrifice, and protected Peter. That it wasn't child trafficking. This was actually a heroic deed. And the character played by Sylvester Stallone, Stakar, who's the leader of the Ravagers in the comics, known as Starhawk, he brings all the Ravagers to this central location where the Guardians are, and they participate in what is a Ravager funeral.
Mm-hmm. They honor his life.
Yeah.
So it sort of brings, it embraces Yondu, celebrates who he was, and it ultimately, accepts him. It's post-mortem, but accepts him into the community, values who he was as a person. And it's interesting that you say Rocket facilitated that, because Rocket is starting to understand. And I think Rocket understood from the beginning, but
he rejected it.
He refuses to be a victim. Mm-hmm. He knows the moment that he lets up, he can be too vulnerable and can be taken advantage of. So I think he's always, he's a tactician. He's 10 steps ahead. I think emotionally, he's probably 10 steps ahead.
Yeah.
I don't think Rocket is emotionally unintelligent or not connected.
No.
I think he's actually
he sees the hurt
emotional.
coming, like you said, 10 steps ahead, and he cuts it off before it could possibly happen, whether it was really going to happen or not. It's what he believes is going to happen. And so while he is a character who is accustomed to pushing people away, in this moment, he brings them all closer. Like he unites them all, and we get to see a beautiful display of fireworks from the ships. And so there are like lots of little Easter eggs in this movie. And I brought up the Celestial thing before, right? You've heard the term Celestial.
Well, is it in the Eternals?
Yeah. So he says he is a Celestial.
This is Ego.
But there's no way he could be, because in that movie, or in this movie, we just have to go with it. We have to hear him say it and understand, okay, we don't know what that means exactly, but sure, you're a celestial being. But now as we jump ahead to Eternals, and we understand that celestials are created by other celestials by basically, if you think of a planet as a womb and the celestial as the fetus, it is growing inside the planet based on the energy of that planet. So you need the people to populate it. You need certain energy to be created from all these people. The celestial is growing from within. The celestial comes out of the planet, is birthed by the planet, and destroys the planet in doing so. And that's not what Ego's doing, right? Ego simply exists. And so what's great is there is an online theory especially after the Eternals came out, that suggests that maybe what Ego actually was sort of a parasite that was following the energies of Celestials. So that's how he was going to these worlds that Celestials inhabited, is because he could basically ride their energies. And so that might be a reason why he had never seen another like him. He had never met another Celestial. He had never met another, eternal being. And it's because the Celestials were probably trying to keep themselves away from, they basically say that he could very much be like the Horde in the comics, which are sort of the anti-Celestials. The idea is that whichever character gains the most power from the energy of a planet then gets to reap the benefits of that planet. So you could basically abort a Celestial if the Horde becomes too powerful from that planet. And it's one of the reasons why the Eternals exist anyway, is to destroy, to make sure that the Celestial is nurtured. Ego, therefore, cannot be a Celestial. And so it's interesting how they basically, I imagine they didn't just retcon it. I'm thinking that this might have been a plan from the very beginning, because we did see, was it in Guardians? We saw, did we see like one of the planets was like a celestial head, right?
We saw something. Yeah.
Yeah, like one of the planets was the dead head of a Celestial, and so now this is the second movie, and he's saying he's a Celestial. We know that that's not what a Celestial is. So I applaud Feige and company for making that happen. I don't know. They might be developing things for future, like bigger bads. Like it's just got to get worse from here, right?
Well, speaking of big bads, we've got to talk about Thanos, who's not in this movie,
but is all over this movie.
But yeah, and in this movie, we learn how Thanos was as a father. It's not surprising to us. And at this time, I know a lot of us know about Thanos, but at this time, Thanos has been shown, he's been hinted at. We know that this, the menacing and destruction of Thanos will happen. It's inevitable, Brian. It's inevitable. But here, it's a study of siblings and how Nebula and Gamora related to one another as daughters of Thanos. Mm-hmm. And so what we learn in this film, and I think the first Guardians got at this too, was that Thanos expected them to fight each other. And Thanos, in fact, pressured the girls to battle each other, to best each other, it's
how he found his favorite one.
Yeah, it was his way of favoritism. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is that Gamora nearly always seemed to be his favorite. And she, time and time again, bested her sister in combat. What's interesting to me is that, and by the way, like, we're talking about these fictional characters, but this dynamic is really common. Even the abuse, although not common in every household, a dynamic where there is a preference, or there is an offspring who is singled out. And I think that people don't talk about this enough when we consider and share stories about violence in the home and abusive family members, and in particular abusive parents. I think there's this fallacy that the abusive parent abuses equally, but most of the time there is a sibling who gets the brunt of it.
Yeah,
there's a sibling who gets more of the abuse, and in some families, in some abusive families, there's one sibling who gets all the abuse. Mm-hmm. And here, I think the dynamic is that Thanos a ruthless villain is a ruthless parent. Like clearly is very he's lacking a nurturing style. He doesn't seem to be loving and caring, but what he does is share with them what he values. So what's interesting is that Nebula loses time after time in these battles and in combat with Gamora. But what she ends up doing is she continues to kind of demonstrate characteristics that actually Thanos doesn't like, right? So Nebula becomes...
Like what? What do you mean?
So she becomes insistent, she wants to best her sister, and that I understand.
Yeah.
But she becomes insistent on receiving Thanos's love and adoration and admiration. And so she clings on to the bond.
It's a weakness.
And and then in turn, sadly, he sees that as her vulnerability. I guess maybe somewhat like the Jedi. Like he doesn't think bonds are good. It's Thanos.
Although he does have a significant bond to, and we can't talk about it yet because it doesn't happen. But there's a significant bond to Gamora.
It's a contingent one, but you're right. He has the ability to have a connection, a caring connection with another family member. But what he devalues, and I think what he sees in Nebula are these characteristics of seeking closeness, depending on him, depending on his trying to get loyalty, trying to show loyalty. And ultimately, he doesn't like these features. He wants her to be like Gamora. Yeah. Toughen up, show less caring, be self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Beat people.
And she says,
that's the point.
I've got a little bit of audio here where she describes what happened to her if she lost in combat with her sister. I want to play this, and then I want to follow it up with another piece of audio that we have from the end of the movie when the two of them have had an opportunity to sort of relate to one another. And I want you to comment on these pieces of audio, Drea. Let's start with what happened to Nebula if she were to lose. Here we go.
What are you going to do with your share?
As a child, my father would have Gamora and me battle one another in training. Every time my sister prevailed, my father would replace a piece of me with machinery, claiming he wanted me to be her equal. But she won. Again and again and again, never once refraining. So after I murder my sister, I will buy a warship with every conceivable instrument of death. I will hunt my father like a dog, and I will tear him apart slowly, piece by piece, until he knows some semblance of the profound and unceasing pain I know every single day.
Yeah. I was talking about like a pretty necklace or a nice hat, something make the other girls go, ooh, that's nice. Anyways, happy trails.
Okay, and now this next piece of audio is basically the moment that Gamora sees Nebula in the distance. This is at Yondu's funeral, and she walks over to Nebula and explains her actions as a youth. And I think this is also very important, and I'd like you to speak to it because I think we're actually touching on it when you're talking about an abusive parent and how they might target one particular child. Let's take a listen here.
I was a child like you. I was concerned with staying alive until the next day, every day. And I never considered what Thanos was doing to you. I'm trying to make it right.
Like in some cases, we hear of stories of the child that wasn't picked on as much standing up for or like trying to protect their the sibling. This one didn't seem like she never really saw her as a sister. Meanwhile, we even get in a scene earlier where they're fighting to the death, essentially. Gamora says, you always wanted to win. You were always just as competitive as I was. And Nebula even says, I didn't want to win. I just wanted a sister.
Yeah, I wanted to, two things, right? I wanted to survive.
Yeah.
Like, if I didn't do this, I would be violated and abused and dehumanized, like literally dehumanized, like robot parts put into my body.
Which I don't think he would have done at Gamora. I don't think, like, if she had ever lost to her sister, I don't think...
There's another kind of lesson there, and I totally agree, and Nebula knows that. So there's this sense of, like, a part of this is survival. I had to do this. I had to hate you.
Yeah.
I was essentially forced to hate you, and I leaned into it because I needed to survive. But I think the other piece is true, too. It's interesting. There's a name for this. It's Hansel and Gretel, which I know is a story, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So Hansel and Gretel is a term that describes siblings who identify with each other.
Oh, I see.
Right. So it's yeah.
I thought you were going to talk, because I'm pretty sure Hansel and Gretel, like,
some bad stuff happened to them.
Well, but they leaned on one another.
Yeah, that's why.
As opposed to, like, these two that battled against one another. Yeah.
So sometimes when there's an abusive parent, you get what's called a Hansel and Gretel relationship, where siblings identify strongly, they bond, they support each other, they protect each other. There's a huge protection there. And this is the opposite of that, where one of the siblings has to, Nebula, we talked about, like, is just trying to survive the situation and is seeking, in a very understandable way, seeking connection and bond with the very person who she's forced to fight with. And Gamora, in her own way, turning away from the violence. Like, her protection is not ignoring what's happening, but finding her own survival, which is to deny, which is to maybe at some point and at some level acknowledge that this abuse is happening, but she's experiencing a different kind of abuse. So there's a chasm there. They don't really see eye to eye. They don't really know each other. They don't really understand, because they're sort of in their own lived experience of this abusive relationship. And what Thanos is doing to Gamora may not be, it's still abusive in its own way.
Yeah.
It may not be physically abusive, but it's emotionally abusive.
Yeah.
And she, as we'll see in future movies, has to reckon with that relationship. It is... Well,
that's something we've even seen in the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. She made it clear that she hated Thanos probably more than anyone. And we don't necessarily understand why until later movies, but you would think that someone like Nebula would hate... It's a weird self-fulfilling prophecy, because all Nebula wants is the closeness. And so even though she hates Thanos, she looks at him as a father that she needs to please, and becomes like his right. She tries to become his right hand, even though she is not worthy in his eyes.
Well, because he hates that about her.
Correct. But Gamora, who does become his right hand, only does so that she can become powerful enough to kill him later. Like, she makes it clear that she was never really wanting to be on his team. She was just looking for the opportunity to get back at her father. And probably as a result of seeing her own sister constantly looking for the approval of the father that she hated, then by extension started to hate the sister, because she felt like that sister really wanted to be as nefarious as Thanos, when actually none of this is true. They just don't communicate, and they end up turning against one another at every possible opportunity. It's an interesting cycle. And
what Thanos is doing, again, it's so horrific, but it has its parallels. It's called parental differential treatment. He's kind of favoriting one sibling over the other. He's treating them differently. He sees them quite differently, not uniquely in a good way, but as a way to enforce, as a way to perpetuate violence, as a way to gain control and power. And ultimately, the relationships that the two girls end up having, sort of the what I'd say, like how they understand relationships is control and power. They've got to interrupt that cycle. They've got to break that chain, so to speak, and find that relationships are not about control and power. Relationships are about what these girls are actually getting closer to doing, which is showing vulnerability, relying on each other, bonding emotionally, teaming up, building community with one another, seeing the other's perspective. They're starting to get closer to that.
Yeah.
But Nebula leaves. So the way this film ends is that Nebula is invited to kind of be with the Guardians, but she takes off.
Right. Is there anyone that we've not really discussed? There's Groot, right? And Groot's an interesting case study because Groot in the first movie might have been one of the wisest of the characters.
Yeah.
Seemed almost ancient, this sort of wooden being that only spoke 3 words. Well, 4 by the end, but seemed to be a very wise character, sacrifices himself for the good of the others. A splinter of his gets put into a pot and begins to regrow a new Groot, which is interesting because that splinter was as old as the rest of him, presumably, but now there's this new creature. So he went from being the wisest of the group to now being an adolescent. And
it's
he's
a
child that
regeneration.
has to be. Yeah, it's not like it's not like a character like say a starfish that when you cut off one, now suddenly you end up growing another piece, and then that other piece ends up becoming its own starfish, whatever.
Oh, like it's not like independent. It doesn't have its own independent consciousness.
Yes. Now by taking off this piece of this branch, and by the way, this is all problematic for so many reasons, because when you constantly see in the first Guardians, he's extending his.
He's constantly like he's got branches and twigs. Like,
right,
can
like,
you make lots of different groups?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is he is basically. They're constantly breaking off of him, and he's extending his arms and then breaking those off, because of what he needs to. Meanwhile, all you got to do is bury any one of these small slivers into something, and you got an army of Groots.
But I like what they did because it requires some of the characters to have. Again, going back to having a bond, a relationship that is not contingent on something other than the love. Like they care for Groot, and at the end of the movie, they're kind of almost like he's getting sleepy, and they're passing him around like a small child who's needing to go to bed. For Rocket, I think Rocket is already used to this kind of relationship, but we start to see with Rocket and with others that you can care for a thing, you can care for a person, you can care for a being without all these strings attached. That it is that unconditional love, and I think that kind of builds.
But the love changes. The love changes, like especially with Rocket. With Rocket, he had a partner, an equal, and now Rocket's a parent.
Yeah,
and
he has to care for him. He has to protect him. He has to look after him. And look, Groot is innocent and cute and fun and adorable, but Groot also can get into trouble and is a little bit irresponsible. Like it's kind of just like many children may not think ahead, and
is oblivious to the world around him.
He doesn't yet have the developmental capacities to think about how his actions could have detrimental effects in the future.
And it'll just get worse because we see some time has passed at the end of the movie, and now we're looking at a teenage Groot who is going through those teenage pubescent, you're not my father. We'd rather play the video game.
Who are we going to see in this third film? Is it a fully grown Groot? Probably not a teenage Groot.
I don't know. I haven't. We've seen the Guardians since this movie. I mean, they've.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, they're in the.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay.
So, you may not know, but there are moments where you are going to see that character.
Oh yeah.
And we'll talk about those soon. We're getting closer and closer.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
To Infinity War and Endgame. Like it's crazy how long it's taken in real time for these movies to exist, but we're like speeding through them. It's interesting. Next time, I think we're talking about Spider-Man Homecoming. Right. And then after that, I think of Black Panther. I could have those confused, but I think next time is Spider-Man Homecoming.
Okay.
That should be interesting because you notoriously hate the character of Spider-Man. Things might be changing. Things might be changing.
I wouldn't say I hate Spider-Man. I've read a couple of comics.
Let's hold off. We will talk about your feelings on Spider-Man, but just understand that we might be seeing a Captain America level of turnaround with you.
Wow.
When it comes to Peter Parker and Spider-Man, maybe. Maybe. So yeah, this is one of your favorites, if not your favorite movie in the MCU now.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, we should end on the music. This music is from an era.
It's my era.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's literally my era.
This music is your music.
Yeah.
And even though it's not necessarily an era of music that I listen to a lot, I loved it. Yeah. I love this music so much.
You can't help but like dance. And, I think when I think of Groot in the opening title sequence, when we talk about being oblivious to the world around him, his other companions are in a fight to the death with this giant interdimensional creature, and Groot's just living his best life dancing to this song.
And I think,
and I think that it's Mr. Blue Sky is the opening titles
and
song.
I think, you've got to compare, unfortunately, when you see DC movies try to do this, like in Suicide Squad, like let's pick music, let's pick songs that are...
You're talking about the new Suicide Squad?
No, the one before that. Like let's pick Queen and all these songs that are gonna just like get people to feel good, feel hyped. It's not just about having the song interlaced in the film. It's about connecting the meaning of the song to what's actually happening with the characters.
I will say this about the music. Right. And you just made me remember this. I was bitter then, and I'm still bitter. Like I said earlier, my favorite band was Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah.
And there's a very prominent Fleetwood Mac song, "The Chain," is in this movie. And that song, like you said, the lyrics,
it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. If you don't love me now, you will never love me again. I can still hear you saying you would never break the chain. All of this makes sense. What I hate is in the moment at the end of the movie when Peter is fighting his father, we start to hear Lindsey Buckingham's guitar doing the beginning of The Chain again. And it's got a very haunting quality to that song. But let's be honest. If we're going to put that song in a movie like this during a fight sequence, it would not be the beginning of the song. I would start with John McVie's famous bass riff. And that song builds to the greatest piece of score to a fight in a Guardians of the Galaxy movie. Like, why would you not use the end of The Chain for this fight sequence with his father? It doesn't make any sense to me from a music director perspective.
Well, let's write the letter.
Okay, we're going to write.
After we wrap this up,
we're going to write the letter.
Find out
where could people write you letters, Drea?
Well, they can write me a digital note on Twitter.
Okay,
they can find me at Arkham Asylum Doc, or on my website, drdreapsychology.com.
You can find me online. I'm at bward028 on Twitter and at b_ward028 on Instagram. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions and on Instagram at The Arkham Sessions. Come find us on Facebook. And I want to thank our patrons for making this all possible. Dr. Jerome Anderson, John Henry, Antonio Lopez, Jay Griffin Hughes, Todd Stashwick, Scott the Therapist. And then we've got a couple of new annual subscribers. Frank Muller, my best friend, Mark Pepper, Michael Pruitt, Weffy, Eric O'Sullivan, Zach Neal, Zachary Hunter, Mike Blanchard, Dr. Girlfriend, Maria Diego, Nick Gilbert, and of course my father, Carl Ward. I want to thank all of you. You can join our Patreon and get called out. And like I said, if you're wanting to get an annual subscription, anything that costs $30 or more, grand total, will get you a challenge coin. I'm sending 5 more out today. So
okay, so do you have more than that? We've got to be down to the last few.
We're getting close.
Okay.
We're getting pretty close. But it's also making me think, due to the success so far of this promotion, maybe we start designing a 2022 coin, Drea. And maybe we let the patrons decide on a design. Maybe we design 2 or 3 and let them vote on which one we get to do. So we'll see. Stay tuned. Until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
I'm Mary Poppins, y'all.